Hello, my name is Eddie Nobles, and I'm here to teach you about Chapter 18, Telephony. This is in our Communications Technology Update and Fundamentals. A little bit about the history of telephony. There's wired and wireless. So first I'm going to talk about the wired phone. The wired phone was invented by Alexander Graham Bell in 1876. He went on to form Bell Telephone Company, which later became AT&T, American Telephone and Telegraph. It was a government-regulated company. It was a monopoly for most of the 20th century. Pretty much all of the major development of the telephone that is now worldwide really came from that company. Their famed Bell Labs, where major achievements include the transistor, the solar cell, data networking, communication satellites, the Unix operating system, as well as C programming language, the DTMF tones that you hear when you dial the phone. All that helps with the routing of telephone signals over the network. Even the network itself. Right now, today, we have the SS7 network, which is the signal switch infrastructure that all of our phone calls go across. That itself was invented by AT&T and Bell Labs. In 1982, the company was finally broken up by the government and forced to split off all of its companies and assets. Many of them have reformed and they became smaller companies. Well, they were smaller, but they've kind of reformed into much larger companies now. Even today, what we see is AT&T, like when you see on the cell phones, where we see most of it today, is just a fraction of what Bell was back in the day. And it may also be worth noting that Verizon, the major competitor to AT&T, was also part of AT&T at one time. Alright, so then we'll go into cellular phones. Cellular, again, was AT&T had a part in that to play. Back in 1947, they came up with a concept. It uses a radio link between the phone and a tower. This radio link, connects it back into the terrestrial network. The first system the first call was made in 1973. Motorola made that phone call. They've been a major player in cellular ever since that day. And obviously, and ironically, the first people they called was AT&T, probably to brag. The first generation phones, as back in today we call it first generation because they were analog phones. They had no features other than just be able to make a phone call. After that, in the late 80s, early 90s, we went into what's been called now the second generation cellular phones. They started using digital technology. The digital technology really, at first there were many different technologies that were competing against one another. In Europe they had kind of a uniform standard because they had what they called G3PP that actually governed how all the different nations in Europe were doing their cell phone technology, because they wanted to be able to talk across borders. In the United States, we weren't quite so lucky. We had all these different entrepreneurs that were coming up with different standards for how to make the cell phones work. So we had competing cellular standards. There was TDMA, CDMA, and that stands for time division multiple access, code division multiple access. There was another one called IDEN, which, if you know your Nextel phones that had the push to talk, they used a little bit different signaling. So that was back in the second generation phones. That was back in the 90s. Some of the advantages of it: increased cell capacity. By having more subscribers in a certain amount of frequency bandwidth and on a certain cell tower, they could actually charge more for the phones, charge more people, and it kind of made it more affordable for each subscriber. So if it hadn't been for that, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. They also, second generation was the first to have data. So some of the things like text messaging that actually first came about with the second generation cell phone. Next, we get into third generation cellular. Third generation cellular, over in Europe, they had their standards, which grew out of the GSM standard into the UMTS, which is the Universal Mobile Telephone Standard. And in the United States, our CDMA 1 standard became CDMA 2000. With the third generation, it increased the bandwidth of how much data they could put through up to 1 megabyte. So 14K up to 1 meg, which is a huge increase. So that brought about the whole new smartphone industry. This is stuff from the early 2000s, early up through mid 2000s, really. So smartphones, suddenly you could get internet on your device. You could get applications. All these things that use internet data suddenly became available. So today we're in the fourth generation. When you go buy phones today, more than likely you're going to get an LTE phone. LTE stands for long-term evolution. Many of the phones we have today, it's all going to a universal standard is really what it's about. AT&T, which was using UMTS, you got Verizon that was using CDMA 2000. They're all going to a single standard, so it makes it where they can have roaming agreements, and you can go anywhere in the nation and pick up whatever cell is there and be able to talk. So it makes it better for us as a user, but it also makes it easier for them because in the long term they'll be able to change the signaling standard from being a circuit switched in the backhaul, which is after it goes from the tower, how it gets to the other wherever you're calling, to what's called a voice over LTE. If you've heard of VoIP phones, which is like when you have your cable, and I'll talk about this later, it's really a good thing for the cell phone companies and the infrastructure that's behind it and how much they have to maintain. Also, it increases the bandwidth for things like video. Video will be the more and more stuff that we use that has video, the more bandwidth we use up. So it's good for that. Some things about wireless we need to know is global wireless revenues are expected to top $1.4 trillion by 2015, and that's just right around the corner. It's a major industry. If you think about how much of your monthly paycheck goes to your communications technology, your cell phones, your regular wired phones, and things of that nature, even if you add in your cable and internet, because you use internet on your phone too. So think about that and how much of what percentage of your income that is. Right now there are 4.6 billion subscribers with cell phones. 91.3% of Americans are expected to have cell phones in just the next few years. That's pretty much everybody. The explosive growth is brought on mobile commerce. 19% of us right now use our mobile phones for shopping, buy things right off the internet. Mobile banking, online news, weather, social media, all these things are just added benefits of using wireless networks. I did mention VoIP. VoIP is another type of telephony that it doesn't use this SS7 signaling network the way our conventional phones do. Instead, it uses what's called voice over internet protocol. So it takes your voice, breaks it down into packets, sends it across the internet however it gets there, and then poof, puts it back together at the end, and you got a phone call. It's cheap, but it does rely on the broadband internet. Slowly it is replacing conventional wired telephone, and in the future it may be how all phone calls are actually transmitted. That requires, as I said, broadband internet. If it goes down, obviously you're going to have problems with that. It's a cheaper alternative. In fact, you may notice like with things like Vonage or Magic Jack, they can actually offer phone service at a fraction of the cost of your traditional providers. Some other major providers are like Comcast, Time Warner Cable, Cox Cable. Anyone that provides your internet can also provide you with a VoIP phone. Some factors to watch. the more the video and high demand things need more broadband resources, it's going to be difficult for companies to keep up. The book's really predicted from 2009 that it would be even worse than it is now. I think slowly, as I see in the industry, because I do work in the industry a bit, they are keeping up. In fact, they are maybe a struggle at times, but they are. Mobile television is really coming online now. You see a lot more mobile TV things. That is something that will use a lot of broadband access. There is a growing need for mobile security. As we move forward and more phones are out there and more operating systems, it gives hackers more things that they can get into. And it also, another thing to think about is privacy issues. Obviously, anyone who's had a Google-powered phone knows that they really keep up with where you're at. So personal security is an issue. That pretty much covers the chapter. My proposed question is this: what factors should parents consider when deciding to give their children cell phones? I'll leave that for you guys to answer in the forum, and I thank you for watching my video, and thanks to the instructor who's been so helpful in this class.